The notification from the bank should have been my first warning. Unusual activity detected on your account. But I was buried in work, drowning in spreadsheets and client calls, so I barely glanced at my phone before pushing it aside. It wasn't until later, when the buzz of my second coffee had worn off and my inbox was finally under control, that I checked my account. My stomach lurched. The numbers didn't make sense. Zero. Every penny from my checking, savings, and emergency fund gone. My hands shook as I scrolled through transactions I didn't recognize. Flights, luxury hotels, high-end boutiques. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I knew exactly who had done this. Elizabeth. My mother. The woman I hadn't trusted in years. Hey, you okay? Tiffany's voice cut through my haze. She was standing at the entrance to my cubicle, concern etched across her face. I held up my phone. My account. It's empty. Her eyes widened. How is that even possible? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The joint account. From college. I never closed it. Tiffany grabbed a chair, sitting beside me. Call her? I already was. The line rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. Nothing. My heart pounded. I have to go home. The drive back was a blur, my thoughts tangled in panic and disbelief. How could she do this? She'd been acting different lately, more stable, more present. I'd let my guard down. Pulling into the driveway of the house, I immediately noticed her car was gone. The front door was locked, but everything inside looked untouched. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe. Then I saw the letter. It sat neatly on the kitchen counter, her handwriting elegant and deliberate. Dearest Gemma, by the time you read this, I'll be overseas. I'm sorry, but I needed a fresh start. You'll understand someday. Love, Mom. The words blurred as my fingers clenched around the paper. I couldn't breathe. Understand? I whispered, my voice shaking. She emptied my account and expects me to understand? A scream ripped from my throat, raw and furious. The house was silent around me, as if it, too, had been left behind. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Hello, is this Gemma Myers? A man's voice.
Calm.
Professional.
Yes.
Who's this? My name is Felix Anderson. I'm your grandmother Talia's attorney. I've been trying to reach you. I gripped the edge of the counter. What is this about? I'm sorry to inform you that your grandmother passed away last week. The room tilted. Grandma Talia, the only person who had ever stood up to my mother. The woman who had paid for my first semester of college when Mom tried to talk me out of going. The one who always told me to fight for what was mine.
Gone.
Felix kept talking something about an estate, a will, a meeting. But I could barely process the words. I was still clutching my phone when another voice broke through. I came as soon as I could. I turned, finding Gideon in the doorway. He crouched beside me, his presence steady, familiar. Tiffany called. Said you might need backup. I let out a shaky breath. She took everything, every cent I had. And now Grandma's gone too. He sat beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. You know what she used to say. Never let anyone steal your dreams. I nodded, wiping my eyes. She believed in me. She still does, he said softly. And you're not alone in this. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Hey, your mom just emailed the office. Said you're taking a leave of absence for a family emergency. Everything okay? My stomach twisted. I showed Gideon the screen. She's covering her tracks, I whispered. Making sure no one questions why I might not be around for a while. She planned this, he said, his voice cold. All of it. Getting close to you again, gaining your trust, just so she could take what she wanted. The numbness inside me was fading, replaced by something sharper. Something darker. What are you thinking? Gideon asked, studying me. I stood, straightening my shoulders. I'm thinking about what Grandma Talia always said. He waited. Sometimes, I said, my voice steady, karma needs a little help. Felix's office was too warm, the kind of heat that made the walls feel like they were closing in. I sat stiffly in the leather chair, my hands clasped in my lap, as he sifted through a thick stack of documents. "Before we begin," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to offer my condolences. Talia wasn't just a client. She was a dear friend." I swallowed hard. "Thank you. I still can't believe she's gone. She spoke of you often." Felix pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the desk. "In fact, you were her primary concern during our last meeting." The door opened, and Tiffany slipped inside, mouthing, "Sorry I'm late." She took the seat beside me, squeezing my hand under the desk. I had asked her to come for moral support. I couldn't do this alone. "As you know," Felix continued, "your grandmother was a shrewd businesswoman. The boutique hotel chain she built is now valued at approximately $12 million. My head snapped up. $12 million. And that's just the hotels. He slid another document toward me. There's also her personal estate, investment portfolio, and various properties. Tiffany's grip on my hand tightened. I barely registered the numbers. My mind was stuck on one thought.
Mom.
She left everything to you, Gemma. Every asset, every property, every penny. My breath caught. But what about my mother's? Felix's expression hardened. Talia was very clear about Elizabeth's exclusion from the will. She said, and I quote, "My daughter has taken enough." A laugh bubbled up in my throat. Hysterical. Disbelieving. "Mom's going to lose it when she finds out." "She already knows," Felix said quietly. "She's been calling my office daily, threatening to contest the will." "From Singapore," I muttered. "How convenient." "There's something else." Felix reached into his desk drawer, pulling out an old leather journal. "Talia left this for you. Said I should give it to you privately." The journal was worn, the pages soft with time. I traced my fingers over the cover, then flipped it open to a marked page. "My dearest Gemma, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I've watched you grow into a strong, capable woman, despite Elizabeth's best efforts to keep you dependent on her. The fortune I've left you isn't just money. It's freedom. Use it wisely. And remember, sometimes the best way to deal with a snake is to let it think it's winning until it can't escape the trap it's set for itself. All my love, Grandma Talia." My hands trembled as I closed the journal. The door opened again, and Tiffany returned alone. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside me. I looked down at the journal, then back at her. "She knew," I whispered. "Somehow, Grandma knew Mom would try something like this. What are you thinking?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a notification. Email from Mom. "Talia's death is such a shock, darling. I know you must be overwhelmed. We should talk about the will. I know we can come to a fair arrangement. Call me. Love, Mom." "She's unbelievable," Tiffany breathed, reading over my shoulder. "She steals your money, runs away, and still thinks she deserves part of the inheritance?" I stood up, pacing. You know what's crazy? Part of me still wants to believe her. That's how good she is. Even now, she almost has me convinced. Tiffany crossed her arms. "So, what's the play?" A plan was already forming in my mind, crystal clear and terrifying. "We let her think she's winning," I said slowly. "Tell Felix to let it slip that I'm considering sharing the inheritance." Tiffany's eyes widened. "You want Mom to come home?" I picked up Grandma's journal. "Fine," I murmured. "Let's give her something to come home to." The master suite had always been off limits to my mother. It was the one room in Grandma's house she had never been allowed to use. Now it would serve as the perfect bait. "She's going to love this," Tiffany said, standing in the doorway as we surveyed the room. "She'll think she's won." I adjusted the pillows on the bed, making everything look inviting, luxurious, safe. "And then she'll walk right into the trap," Tiffany finished with a grin. Hidden cameras were installed in every corner. The safe in the closet, stocked with expensive-looking jewelry, was rigged to record when opened. The laptop left in the room had tracking software. Every email she sent, every call she made from the house network, it would all be forwarded to me. Tiffany's phone buzzed. "She booked a flight," she announced. "Lands tomorrow morning."
Perfect.
The next morning, Gideon waited at the airport, holding a sign with Mom's name scrawled across it. She stepped through the terminal, dressed in designer sunglasses and feigned humility. "Where's Gemma?" she asked, scanning the crowd. "She's busy with the hotels," Gideon said smoothly. "Sent me to pick you up." As they drove to the house, I watched through the security feed. The cameras captured everything. The way her eyes darted around, sizing up the place, the flash of satisfaction when she saw the master suite. That night, as I sat in my office, my phone buzzed again. A text from Mom. "Darling, I know I've made mistakes. But let's talk. We're family. We should decide what's fair, together." I stared at the message, then at the live feed of her in the suite. She was already trying to open the safe. "She thinks she's playing me," I murmured. Tiffany leaned over my shoulder. "But she has no idea what's coming." I tapped out a reply.
Of course, Mom.
"Let's talk." I hit send, watching the security feed as she smiled at her phone.
Game on.
The master suite gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, the silk curtains swaying gently with the night breeze. It had always been my mother's dream to live in this room, to take her place as the heir to Talia's empire. Now it was a gilded cage. "This is some next-level psychological warfare," Tiffany muttered, standing in the doorway. "I love it." The closet was stocked with designer clothes, all tagged with security sensors. The safe in the corner contained dazzling jewelry, nothing of real value, but expensive-looking enough to tempt her. The desk was adorned with a sleek laptop preloaded with fabricated financial documents. "She won't be able to resist," I murmured, tapping at my phone. Devin, our tech expert, had rigged the entire suite. Every drawer, every cabinet, every device watched. Any attempt to open the safe, access the computer, or send emails would be recorded. Gideon entered, tossing a stack of papers onto the desk. "Got the final touches for you. Fake property transfers, forged investment contracts, all pointing to deals that don't actually exist." I flipped through them, nodding. "Good. She'll think she's found her next payday." Tiffany folded her arms. "So, what's the endgame?" "We let her think she's in control. And then..." I glanced at the security feed on my phone. "We let her hang herself with her own greed." The moment Mom arrived, she put on the performance of a lifetime. "Oh, sweetheart," she gushed, wrapping me in an embrace that smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. "I've missed you." I didn't hug back. She pulled away, hands lingering on my arms as she studied my face. "I know I made mistakes, Gemma. I just want to make things right." "Of course," I said, smiling. "That's why I wanted you to stay here. So we can rebuild." Her eyes flickered with something sharp, something calculating. "I'd love that," she murmured. I led her to the master suite. The moment she stepped inside, I saw the greed bloom in her expression. Her fingers trailed along the ornate furniture, the velvet bedding, the polished wood of the vanity. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours while you're here." Her gaze flitted to the closet, the safe, the laptop. It took all my restraint not to smirk. "Take your time settling in," I said, feigning warmth. "We'll talk later." As soon as I left the room, I pulled up the live security feed. Mom wasted no time. First, she opened the closet, running her hands over the designer labels. Then, she moved to the safe, testing a few combinations before sighing in frustration. Next, she settled in at the desk, flipping open the laptop. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the documents. And then, just as I had predicted, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. Tiffany, watching over my shoulder, grinned. "She's making her move." By the next morning, Mom had already contacted several potential investors. "She's been emailing and calling real estate agents, financial backers. She's setting up meetings," Devin reported. "She's using the fake contracts as bait." Gideon exhaled sharply. "She's really going all in, huh?" "Of course she is," I said, leaning back in my chair. "This is the biggest scam of her life." Tiffany tapped on her phone. She just confirmed a lunch meeting with 3 investors at the Blue Lotus tomorrow. I smirked. Perfect. The Blue Lotus was packed when I arrived the next afternoon. I spotted Mom immediately. She sat at a corner table, dressed to impress, her smile wide and inviting. Across from her, Three well-dressed men listened intently as she gestured over the fabricated contracts. Marcus sat beside her, nodding along, her old partner in crime. I made my way to the bar, where Tiffany sat with a martini, her phone propped up discreetly. She's promising them priority investments in exclusive hotel properties, Tiffany whispered. Guaranteed 30% returns. Same scam, different setting, I muttered. My phone buzzed. Devin, she's just tried to email the contracts to someone. Got it intercepted. I turned to Tiffany. It's time. She pressed a button on her phone, activating the call we had staged. Across the restaurant, Mom's phone rang. She excused herself, stepping away from the table. Hellos. Tiffany had disguised her voice perfectly. Mrs. Myers? This is Sandra from First National Bank's fraud department. We need to discuss some suspicious transactions. I watched as Mom's expression shifted from confidence to barely contained panic. She muttered a hurried excuse and ended the call. I stood up, adjusting my blazer. Showtime. I approached the table just as she was returning. Mom, I said loudly, causing her to freeze mid-step. Imagine running into you here. Her face went pale. Gemma, what are you doing here? The investors turned to me with curiosity. Oh, I was just thinking about business, I said, taking a seat beside her. I picked up one of the contracts and held it up. Like these. One of the investors frowned. You know about these deals? Of course I do, I said, smiling at my mother. It's fascinating, really. How someone could fabricate entire contracts using outdated hotel names and fake projections. The investors stiffened. What? One of them asked sharply. Mom tried to laugh. Sweetheart, you must be mistaken. I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen. A security video played, footage of her in the master suite, taking photos of the documents, trying to access the safe. The investors stood abruptly. This is a scam, one of them spat, tossing the papers aside. I can explain, Mom said, panic rising in her voice. But they were already leaving. Marcus tried to slip away, but Tiffany blocked his path. Not so fast. Mom turned to me, her voice trembling. Why would you do this? I met her gaze. Because you taught me well, Mother. Her perfect composure cracked. You ruined me, she whispered. No, I said coldly. You ruined yourself. With one final glance at her crumbling empire, I turned and walked away. Complete humiliation. Public disgrace. And the best part? She never even saw it coming. Elizabeth sat across from me in the office, her shoulders hunched, her once perfect posture deflated. She looked nothing like the woman who had strolled into my life days ago, dripping in confidence and designer perfume. The mask had finally cracked. You set me up, she whispered. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded.
No, Mom.
I just let you do what you always do. Her hands clenched in her lap. I was going to pay you back. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. That's the thing, isn't it? You always have an excuse. Always have a plan. You take, and you convince yourself that you'll fix it later. Tears welled in her eyes. Real ones this time, not the perfectly timed crocodile tears she'd used in the past. Gemma, I know I've done terrible things. But I'm still your mother. I stared at her, at the woman who had spent her life using me as a pawn, as a resource, as collateral in her endless schemes. I know, I said softly. That's why I'm giving you a choice. She blinked. A choice. I slid an envelope across the desk. Inside is a one-way ticket to Montana. A small town. Quiet. No scams, no schemes. Just a fresh start. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. And, if I don't take it? I placed a second folder on the desk. Then I send this to the police. It has everything, evidence of your scams, your fraud, statements from past victims. I press charges. You'll lose everything, and this time, there won't be another escape. Silence stretched between us. She swallowed hard, looking down at the ticket. Montana, a small town.
A job.
An apartment. Enough money for 6 months after that. You're on your own. No shortcuts, no easy marks. A real life. Her gaze lifted to mine. And you think I can just change? I don't know, I admitted. That's up to you. She laughed bitterly. I don't deserve this. No, I agreed. You don't. But I do. Her brows furrowed. I deserve to know I at least tried to break this cycle, I said. To walk away knowing I gave you a real chance to be something better. Her hands tightened around the ticket. When do I leave?
Now.
The office door opened, and Gideon stepped in. He gave me a questioning glance. I nodded. She's ready. Mom rose slowly, glancing between me and the envelope. You're really sending me away. You did this to yourself. For a second, I thought she might argue. Try to manipulate me one last time. But instead, she let out a shaky breath and nodded. She started toward the door, but paused. You really are Talia's granddaughter, she murmured. She would have been proud. I watched her walk out, the door closing behind her. Only then did I let my breath escape. Tiffany entered moments later, holding 2 glasses of wine.
Well,
that was dramatic. I took one, sipping slowly. You okay? She asked. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. I think so. Tiffany sat across from me, watching carefully. And now, I slid another folder across the desk. She opened it, brows raising. A restitution fund? I'm using the hotel profits to start paying back the victim's mom scammed, I explained. It won't fix everything, but it's a start. Tiffany exhaled. That's a lot. Are you sure? I have to be. She squeezed my hand. You're a better person than she deserved. Maybe, I admitted. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be like her. Months passed. I threw myself into work, into the hotels, into making sure that Grandma's legacy stood for something better. The restitution fund was growing, small payments quietly sent to families who had lost everything to my mother. And, despite myself, I kept tabs on her. She hadn't left Montana. She was working at a small cafe, wiping down tables, serving coffee.
no scams.
No stolen fortunes. Just a quiet life. And so, one winter morning, I found myself sitting in a car outside that very cafe, watching through the frosted window as she refilled a customer's cup. She looks different, Gideon said beside me. Yeah, I murmured. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled anymore. Her nails weren't manicured. She looked real. You sure you want to go in? He asked. I nodded. I have to. He gave me a reassuring look. I'll be right here. I stepped out, the bell above the door chiming as I entered. Mom's back was turned as she restocked sugar packets. We're closing in 10 minutes. I swallowed. Hello, Mom. She froze. Slowly, she turned around. Her eyes widened. Gemma. I took a seat at the counter. Coffee. Black. Her hands shook as she poured it. As she slid the cup in front of me, she whispered, Are you here to check if I'm still a fraud?
No, I said.
I already know. Her lips pressed together. I pulled out an envelope and slid it toward her. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was Talia's silver mirror. Her breath hitched. Why? I met her eyes. Because change has to start somewhere. Tears filled her gaze. She reached for me, but hesitated. I didn't move. She nodded, swallowing hard. Will I see you again? I thought about the years of lies, the betrayals, the pain. And yet here we were. I stood. Maybe. I turned, heading toward the door. Just before stepping outside, I glanced back. She was holding the mirror close, her reflection staring back at her. For the first time in her life, she was seeing herself. Really seeing. And for now, that was enough.